I had a horrendous journey up here, but it's probably slightly less horrendous than what the chairman of this party went through a week or so ago. Because it's in everyone's mind, and because 8 million saw the broadcast, which basically means 2 or 3%, that's 16 to 20 million people, you could basically say the active part of the population that votes saw that broadcast. Only half of people vote at parliamentary elections anyway, around a third at Europeans and devolved to Scotland and Wales, and about a quarter to a third for local elections. So most of the people who are ever going to vote in one way or another saw it, and you can see it anywhere in the world on the internet for as long as you want afterwards. One experiment that I did was to freeze the frame and look at the question time panel, because often you can actually see quite a lot from the body language of the people involved. And if we go round the circle, the black woman, Bonnie Greer, on the other side, who adopted this sort of, Mama knows best, slightly condescending attitude throughout the whole broadcast. If you actually freeze the frame, she looks frightened and slightly askance, and it's quite clear that that sort of matriarchal bent, that this pose that she adopted, was just that, an act. The Times gave her 2 out of 10 for effort, particularly when she started waffling about the Red Indian origins of Winston Churchill, that seemed to lose most of the people in the studio. The other interesting item was Dimbleby, whose career is on the line at the BBC, and was privately told before the broadcast that he had to shape up for this one, otherwise people would remember that he's 70 years of age and might be farmed out. That's why he was slightly hyper and yet ultra-Tory and rather pompous throughout the entire thing. It's also why he was interrupting all the time, just to show that he was on the game, on his mettle. If we move slightly to the other side, we have Jack Straw. I pause for a moment. What do we think of Jack Straw, eh? Now, Straw, interestingly, began in such a nervous and hyper state that he could hardly speak, because he was in such a state of internal tension about appearing with the, most demonic party of all. And if you look at some of the freeze frames of him, he's nervous, he's endlessly looking at his nose, he manages to say the same thing again and again and again in a slightly different way. When you actually see some of these people under a degree of pressure, it makes you wonder how they've ever kept these jobs. This is a man who's an ex-Home Secretary, partially still a Home Secretary in a sort of Justice Ministry sort of a way, an ex-Foreign Secretary who's negotiated with American presidents and the Iranians and this sort of thing, and yet he's actually giving every indication in that studio of fear, of fright, of palpitations. He's had weeks to prepare as well. Then we move slightly to the other side and we have this Asian Tory Muslim peeress, an odd sort of combination. She performed probably better than most of the other establishmentarian ones, because her line is that a Tory immigrant spokesman is able to make remarks and say the odd thing that the Cameroonians around David, who will be the front bench in about 8 months' time, in other words our new government, feel that they can't say. The Times, somewhat absurdly, gave her 8 out of 10. They gave Straw 7, which is a slight overestimate in the circumstances. Then we move to whom? The Liberal. Now initially the Liberal leader, Clegg, was going to appear on the panel with Nick Griffin, but he decided to chicken out at the end. He put out some sort of tangential message to the effect that he was giving the British National Party too much credibility if the leader of the third party appeared with, in some respects, the leader of the fourth. So he decided to push in his rival. And there's a subtext going on there, because although all these people united on the night in their ganging up, they all affect to hate each other most of the rest of the time, and are always fighting with each other. Hune and Clegg are rivals. Hune looked very uncomfortable throughout the entire broadcast, made few telling remarks, followed Straw's lead, but seemed nervous and inconclusive. He's the man the Liberals want to be Home Secretary. You also have to remember that there was a mob outside Television Centre, 200 to 300 Trotskyists from United Against Fascism, the continuation of the Anti-Nazi League. Interestingly, one member of United Against Fascism wasn't there, letting off his red smoke bombs and shouting and screaming. Do you remember how many of you were at the Red, White and Blue? Quite a lot. Now, we had some of the activities of United Against Fascism had the red, white and blue. There were about 1,000 of them allegedly, and they had a master plan which the police in Derbyshire couldn't seem to work out. And that was to block the road at one end leading to the site and block the road at the other end leading to the site and mill around in Codnor where Derbyshire police have their headquarters, interestingly enough. When the mob got bored, they were assailed or entertained by transvestites. This is a true story, by transvestites who sort of sung and whooped and danced in front of the assembled communists as a minor amusement during the afternoon. Well, you know, it's what keeps them happy. So there was 300 of them outside Television Broadcasting House in West London, and there was a mob inside of a different and slightly more civic character. This was the hand-picked audience, although slightly representative of what progressive London, quote-unquote, has become. Half of the audience was ethnic, proportion sort of homosexual, and the rest was sort of white, liberal, Camden Town, Kentish Town, Camden Market, slightly alternative society, that sort of thing. There were probably 3 or 4 party members. I think one of whom, I seem to recall, asked a question to the panel about did they think there were too many immigrants in the country. Straw, on a reflective pause, said no. No, he doesn't think there are too many immigrants in the country. Well, that's interesting. The others equivocated and refused to answer. Now, the BBC said there will be a repeat of this circus on an annual basis. And they say that it's the fault of the British for voting for this political party that we're on Question Time to begin with. Now, it's a great moment in a sense because the Question Time appearance, even though it's just one TV broadcast, breaks something called the no platform policy. Since the late 1970s, there's been a tacit agreement amongst broadcasters that the British National Party or any organisation of a similar sort is not allowed on with the others. The BBC's now endorsed this party, say what you like. They now regard it as a mainstream party, and although they rigged the show so that they would show their prior disapproval to their liberal friends and reflect their politically correct ideology internally as well as externally, the truth of the matter is they now know that this party is a mainstream organisation. As far as the masses are concerned, the British Broadcasting Corporation, or BBC, has endorsed the British National Party, or BNP. And that's what all the screaming was about. When Peter Hain, the former leader of the anti-apartheid movement in Britain, a man who's campaigned against white and European people all over the world, in South Africa, in relation to the Rhodesian struggle, most of those societies have gone, of course, and just have a little look at the nature of the societies that have replaced them. Why do you think many white South Africans live here, or live in Australia, or live in Canada, or live in North America? They live because they're escaping from what occurred there and what individuals like Hain campaigned with every waking moment that he possessed in the 1960s and 70s to bring about. But when Hain, the former Welsh and Northern Irish secretary in this government, said that it's a nightmare to allow the British National Party on, irrespective of how the chairman does in the performance and in the debate, he's right. The hardliners on the other side are perversely right, because they understand that it's a war of position. And when you're on, you're on. And the masses look at that broadcast and they think, well, they're all ganging up on him, and he's not entirely allowed to speak, and he's being relatively moderate. And on the other hand, he's arrived. He's with the Tories, he's with the Liberals, he's with Labour, he's with pompous Dimbleby, he's with the token black history quote-unquote expert. He's there, on the BBC, in front of them all. And that is where you have to be in relation to this society. We're heading for the Second World by the middle of this century and the Third World by the end of this century on present trends, not just demographic. This country is in radical decline in almost all areas, civically, racially, culturally, religiously, in terms of the family structure, in terms of our military preparedness, in terms of our government bureaucracy. At the moment, it's déjà vu. I grew up as a teenager in the 1970s, where the lights flickered, and the dead weren't buried, and the bin men were out, and the postal workers were out, and the lights flickered overhead earlier on under Heath and so on. It's getting a bit similar, isn't it? The bin men are out in Leeds, the post office is going through convulsions, they have no pension, they're sacking